Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Wiradjuri country.
This is episode 297 of the Australian Hiker Podcast, and in this week's episode, we talk about the Yerong walking track. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published, and if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. The Yerong walking track is one of a handful of walking tracks contained within the Rock Nature Reserve, also known as the Kengal Aboriginal Area, located not far out of the regional city of Wagga Wagga. This locale is one of those hidden gems that the locals make very good use of, but in our case we only discovered it more by accident when the New South Wales Park Service promoted it through their social media feeds. In this podcast episode, we talk about this key walk and the reserve in general, including a series of on-trail recordings, and we also discuss the Rock Nature Reserve more generally, and hopefully it will encourage you to visit. Good morning. As you might be able to hear, we're in our car travelling on our way to our destination hike for the day, and that is actually the Yerong walking track, which is located in the Rock Nature Reserve, Kengal Aboriginal place. This was a walk or a destination that I wasn't really aware of until a few months ago, and came across it when the New South Wales Park Service did one of their usual posts promoting some of their places. It's around about 30 to 40 kilometres just outside of Wagga, so it's been a long drive down this morning, about 3.5 hours roughly drive this morning, and we were actually planning on camping for the weekend, but the weather forecast is not so good, so we decided to make a long day of it. So 6 a.m. start this morning, and by the time we get back it'll probably be close to sort of 4:35, 6 o'clock this evening. This walk itself is roughly around about 6 kilometres and not overly onerous, although there are supposed to be some difficult spots in spaces. As we're heading towards there, we've got about 10 kilometres to go, and all the canola fields in this area are out in flower, which makes for a quite attractive destination on the side of the road. Okay, we will talk to you at the start of the walk. It's 9:41. We're here at the Kengal, the Rock Nature Reserve car park. It's actually a really pleasant little location. It's I don't know how long this recreation area has been here for, but by looking at what's here now, they must have done some revamp and update probably over the last 5 years by the look of it, because a lot of the infrastructure looks very new. So there's a good covered picnic area. Car park probably takes around about 25, maybe even 30 cars if everyone parks correctly. A toilet block, and it's a really pleasant feel to it because it's in a low forested area, and it'd be a nice place to have a family picnic at some point. One thing I didn't realise about this area is, looking online at the New South Wales website, really the only walk that appeared to be obvious was the Yerong walking track, which was 2.9 kilometres to the summit. But there's also one called the Galenia Loop Track, which is only 315 metres, but it appears to have rock art associated with it. And then there's also the Towers via Yugay walking track, 900 metres, and then the Yugay walking track, which is 2.9 kilometres to the summit. Now, the Yugay walking track is, by the look of the signs on there, a harder grade. They're both grade 4s, but I think it's, by the look of it, it's a harder walk than the Yerong track itself.
Yeah, the Yugay walking track, according to the signage, has a bit of scrambling and rock stairs to climb up, but there's no sense of that on the Yerong walking track. And some people who just came down they're obviously locals and either know about her, have done both walks, and are saying the Eurong is an easier walk to do. It's still grade 4, but easier than the UGA.
Looking at the weather's actually fined up. We were supposed to get rain today and this weekend, and there are some storms coming through tomorrow according to the forecast. But the rain's cleared. It's a bit of cloud. It's mild without being overly hot. So looking forward to a good walk. We'll talk to you later on. We've been going just on 40 minutes and we've done just on 1.9 kilometres. This trail is pretty much uphill all the way. You don't really notice the gradient increase when you start the walk, but you get to a point where it starts steadily going upwards and the slope is starting to increase. So we're pretty much at the base of the rock and starting to work our way up a bit steeper now. And the vegetation is really nice. It just has this really nice feel about it.
Yeah, it does. So we've been walking through low open woodland. We've just started to do, as Tim said, a slightly steeper ascent. And we're in a spot where there's a sign and some information about lichen in the area. And there's lots of lichen. And long time ago, I used to work in that area. So I always like those sorts of things in terms of the mosses and the fungi and also the orchids. Don't forget the orchids. So yeah, it's really pleasant. Few people on the trail, but not too many, just a handful, and all spaced differently, so you don't really hear them once they're past. Yeah, and some nice deep gullies, and there's a gentle breeze that's blowing, so it's turned out to be a beautiful day, and so far a really enjoyable walk.
Not sure if you can actually hear it or not in the background. We're actually moved into an area where there's just as many casuarinas as there are eucalypts, and you've got the wind just whispering through the casuarinas. May not show up in the recording, but certainly you can hear it when we're sitting here.
Yeah, it adds a gentle kind of ambience to the area. It's not whistling so loud that it becomes annoying, as can sometimes happen with casuarinas and high wind. But yeah, it's very pleasant.
Okay, we'll finish our short break and head on.
So we're up at the summit. It's been a bit of a climb. So there's a point at which there's a sign that says, I think it's about 780, 800 metres. From there on, it gets quite steep, lots of rock steps, and as you get closer to the summit, a little bit of clambering. Not too bad, but if you take your time, it'll be okay. And then the views just start to open up, which is lovely. Once you get to the summit, we can see into the distance with the farming land. The canola is starting to flower, so some beautiful bright yellow patches. A few filtered views through the trees in some places, but yeah, it's a hard climb, but definitely worth it.
So we've just made our way back down from the summit, and we've stopped back at the rock and information sign that talked about lichen, which was where we stopped and had a short morning tea this morning. Weather-wise, has actually been quite good. It hasn't, I don't know what the temperature is, but I think it must be just under 20. It's not overly hot. And there is a bit of a cool breeze, which is quite nice. And where we're sitting at the moment, we're in filtered shade, so it's quite pleasant to sort of sit here. From the summit back down to virtually where we are now is really the steepest part of the trail. And from here, we still are heading down, but it's a much shallower gradient. So it's much easier from this point onwards back to the car.
Yes, so up until this point, we still had a lot of steps to climb back down, and some twists and turns and switchbacks and so on. But from here on in, it'll be much more leisurely. Let's just say that.
Okay, we will actually have a short lunch break and then head back. Okay, so we're back at the car park now. It's 12:43 and we've just finished the walk, which has taken us just on 2 hours and 50 minutes.
Yeah, so beautiful walk, really worth doing. I mean, we took it easy and it's starting to warm up now, but we had a few stops on the way and stops on the way back, so it was all kind of nice. A few more cars at the car park here now, some finishing, some starting, so it's definitely a well-walked track.
Yeah, and there's people that have finished their walk that are having lunch at the picnic area, more people still arriving, so yeah, it is a very popular destination. Okay, that's all for the on-trail recordings. In our next session, we'll talk more in detail about the track itself. Okay, so that was our short walk on the Yorong walking track in the Rock Nature Reserve. Very long sort of name, and there's another name after that talks about the Aboriginal area as well. So we'll have the full name of the actual site on our trail write-up, as well as in the show notes of this podcast. So really, this is another one of these walks that I'll start off by saying it's a bit erratic from the government's point of view. So we got there in the morning, and it really is a very well set up area. Picnic area with gas barbecues, toilet facilities, car park for about 30 car parking spaces. And then you've got a nice big signboard that talks about the various walks that were available. And I must admit, when we first headed out there, I just had the view that there was one main walk, and there might have been others, but I wasn't aware of them. Only to discover there really was probably 3 main walks and a couple of minor walks as well that were sort of 300 and 600 metres. So it really is, there's something for everybody depending on their skills and abilities. But one of the things is if you go online to the internet and have a look at the information, and then you have a look at the signboards that are out there, there's differences in the distances for these walks. There's also differences in that the Yorong walk, supposedly, according to the internet, is a grade 3, but you get out there and it's a grade 4, and it is a grade 4.
Yeah, it is.
So they obviously, when they go through and update the infrastructure and the facilities, they don't necessarily marry up the internet when things happen.
Well, I guess that reinforces why we walk and why we experience and then write up, because it's the first-hand experience. So this was definitely in that category of, we thought it'd be a really good walk, probably didn't think it would be as punishing as it was. That last probably 700 or 800 metres is quite difficult, very steep, uphill, rocky, and not necessarily clambering, but for people my height, the steps are quite large, so you really do feel the pressure on your legs.
As Phil said, the last 700 to 800 metres towards the summit was the most difficult part of the whole walk. And I think it's one of those things that it did surprise me, because I came away for the majority of the walk thinking the gradient's really good. Yes, it's generally uphill all the way up. But it's not
downhill all the way down.
Downhill all the way down. But then there was this sharp incline towards the end of it. So that's where you think, oh, yep, this is all good, no problem. And then you get to the last bit, and it definitely is a big push and a big ask towards the end of it.
Yeah, and I think everybody that we talked with on that day felt the same thing and felt the same way. Some people talked about, that last piece took them around 25 minutes to do, which, when you think about it, isn't a lot of time when you're out and about, but yeah, you definitely did feel it. It was worth it. The views are just stunning. The sense of achievement is really good. Going downhill I always find much easier. Perhaps not so much Tim, but
my knees definitely felt it on the way down.
Tim was a bit slow, and I had to keep stopping and waiting for him. But so I guess it depends on who you are and what's comfortable for you. But generally, everybody can do it if they take their time.
The other general comment I'd make on this area, I mean, this is the Rock Nature Reserve, and it really is a well set out area. I mean, I hadn't actually heard of this walk prior till a couple of months ago, and it was only because the New South Wales government had just been promoting their various parks and reserves that this one cropped up in my social media feed, and I thought this looks like a really interesting place to head to. And not realising it was about 40 k's from Wagga. So it's not, in the middle of nowhere, but getting to Wagga and getting back again, it can be a bit of a trial when you're trying to do walks on the same day. And it wasn't originally our intent. We were planning on tenting it for the weekend, but the forecast was for quite bad weather. So we thought we'll go down there, happy to walk in bad weather, but didn't want to sort of overnight it in bad weather. So we ended up with a roughly 3-ish hour drive each way, and then the walk itself.
And, that turned out to be quite an easy thing for us to do, and, something that others might want to think about, a bit of a drive, and you do have to pay for petrol, but it was quite an economic way to do it and do a walk that we wouldn't have normally gotten to without having to either camp overnight or pay for accommodation overnight. So, think about those places in your local area that are a little bit further away that you can drive to, that you can spend, kind of 3 or 4 hours walking and then drive back. If you share the driving and share the cost, it's a good way of getting out of town and getting into an area that's a little bit different to your usual trail.
Overall, the actual trail surface itself was pretty good. As I said, the gradient was a steady incline for most of the walk until that last section as you made your way up to the top of the rock itself. And it was a reasonably wide sort of path.
It was certainly well maintained. I mean, that was quite clear too, yeah.
And, it was really that last section towards the summit, whereas if it had been raining, it could have been a bit muddy potentially.
Yeah.
It's overall it was pretty good infrastructure on the trail. One of the options that exist with this is you can do this pretty much as a circuit. There's a second walk there, and they do actually have a warning sign on the second walk. It's about the same sort of distance. It potentially is a grade 5 by the look of it.
They say it's a grade 4, but it's definitely a warning sign.
Because they're saying the trail itself may not be in good condition and you've got a bit of scrambling to do on that one.
Yeah.
So, it's the sort of thing they recommend that you do the Yerong if you're just the typical hiker, and if you want a bit of exertion, I suppose, you tend to do the other one. And I did see someone who had come up the other one, didn't go up to the summit that we went up to, and then just looped back around. So they did this as a circuit and ended up back at the same spot, roughly the same sort of distance, but in her case, she didn't actually come up to the summit itself. So for us, this was I think when I did the write up for this podcast, the written version, my comment was that this is sort of the best kept secret that locals obviously know about, and there were a lot of people coming and going throughout the day visiting this site, and a few people who had actually, by the look of it, run up and run down. They were having a picnic towards the end. They definitely got back before we did. But they looked like they were having a picnic lunch at the end of the day with some other friends who were walking up the distance up and back. So I think, as I said, sometimes you've just got to look and find something that may be a bit out of your comfort zone as far as driving, or that you may not have thought of. I mean, really for us, there was no particular reason to go to Wagga. We didn't have any other plans there. We just drove there to do this walk, and we were quite glad we did. And I think there's enough there at this site to keep you busy for a 2 or 3 day weekend if you want to do all the walks. 2 days if you're really fit, 3 days for the average hiker. And there is one walk that takes you to the rock climbing face. So rock climbers will probably know this area, but they don't like you climbing from July through till the end of December, because that's when the peregrine falcons are nesting. So they try and keep rock climbers off that area. But certainly January through to the end of June, it's open for rock climbing for people that are that way inclined.
Yeah, and I guess that gives you a bit of a glimpse of the wildlife in the area that you might be able to experience as well. And from our perspective, the plants were just lovely. The flowers were starting to bloom, and, the colour in probably another month I think would be pretty spectacular.
We still had a bit of research to do after we came back. We think there was an orchid there, but it was really hard to tell. But we've just got to do a bit of final research to work out what they are.
It was really abundant, but I wasn't convinced it was an orchid because of the abundance, but I could be wrong.
Okay, That's all for this week's episode. We hope you've enjoyed. And if you get a chance, head out and do this walk because it is a great little walk and a good place to spend a weekend. That's all for now. Bye for me.
And bye from me.